Why you must educate yourself every single day. Imagine two people. They are the same age. They have similar intelligence. They went to similar schools. They have access to the same internet. They have the same 24 hours every day. But 5 years later, their lives look completely different. One person has become more confident, communicates better, understands money, knows how to solve problems, has developed valuable skills, and can make better decisions. The other person is still waiting for someone to teach them what to do. What created the difference? It wasn't necessarily talent, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't always money. One of the biggest differences was incredibly simple. One person kept educating themselves every day, even when nobody was forcing them, even when there was no exam, even when there was no teacher, even when nobody was watching. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Not studying for an exam, not memorizing textbooks, not collecting degrees. I'm talking about something much bigger, educating yourself every single day so that you become a more capable version of yourself. Because the world doesn't stop changing just because you finished school. Technology changes, industries change, money changes, people change, jobs change, communication changes. And if you stop learning, the world continues moving while you remain where you were. Think about your phone. Your phone receives updates regularly. Your applications receive updates. Your computer receives updates. Even the software running behind the scenes is constantly improving. But what about you? When was your last update? Maybe yesterday, maybe last month, maybe years ago. And that's the strange thing about human beings. We understand that machines need updates, but sometimes we forget that our knowledge needs updates too. Education doesn't end with school. Many people have a strange relationship with education. They think education means go to school, then college, then get a degree, then get a job, then stop learning. But that's not education. That's simply a formal education system. Real education is much larger. Real education is the process of becoming better at understanding the world. You can educate yourself by reading. You can educate yourself by watching a documentary. You can educate yourself by learning a new language. You can educate yourself by understanding economics. You can educate yourself by learning how computers work. You can educate yourself by studying psychology. You can educate yourself by learning communication. You can educate yourself by understanding your own mistakes. You can even educate yourself through a 5-minute conversation with someone who knows something you don't. Education is everywhere. The question is, are you actively looking for it? Because information is now incredibly cheap. You don't need to travel to another country to learn from an expert. You don't necessarily need to pay thousands of dollars. You don't need access to a giant library. You can open your phone and learn about physics, business, psychology, history, programming, philosophy, finance, communication, or almost anything else. But this creates another problem. We have access to more information than any previous generation. Yet having access to information doesn't automatically make you educated, because there is a difference between consuming information and learning. You can watch 500 motivational videos and learn nothing. You can save 100 educational posts and remember nothing. You can buy 50 books and read none. You can spend 3 hours watching videos about productivity and still accomplish nothing. Education isn't about how much information enters your brain. It's about what changes because of that information. The information you consume becomes part of your thinking. Let's say you spend every day consuming content about gossip, negativity, meaningless arguments, and endless entertainment. Eventually, that content becomes part of your mental environment.
Now, imagine another person spends an hour every day learning about psychology, communication, history, business, science, and practical skills. After one day, the difference is almost invisible.
After 1 month, it's noticeable. After 1 year, it's significant. After 5 years, the difference can become enormous. This is because your mind is constantly collecting patterns. What you repeatedly see influences what you think about. What you repeatedly think about influences what you believe. What you believe influences your decisions. Your decisions influence your actions. Your actions create your habits. And your habits eventually influence the direction of your life. So when you educate yourself every day, you're not simply collecting facts. You're gradually changing the way you see reality. Your brain is a filter. Imagine two people walking through the same city. One person knows nothing about architecture. The other has spent years studying architecture. They walk past the same building. The first person sees a building. The second person sees the structure, design, materials, symmetry, history, engineering decisions, and architectural style. The environment didn't change. Their knowledge changed what they could see. This happens everywhere. Someone who understands finance sees opportunities and risks in situations that another person doesn't notice. Someone who understands psychology recognizes manipulation that another person might miss. Someone who understands communication notices why a conversation is failing. Someone who understands technology can see how a new technological development might create opportunities. Knowledge gives you additional lenses through which to see the world, and this is one of the greatest benefits of educating yourself. You begin to notice things you couldn't notice before. Knowledge gives you options. Imagine you're standing in front of a locked door. You don't know how to open it. You push. Nothing happens. You pull. Nothing happens. You might think the door is impossible to open. Then someone teaches you that there's a key hidden underneath the mat. Suddenly, the problem wasn't impossible. You simply didn't have the knowledge required to solve it. Life works like this. Many problems aren't solved by trying harder. Sometimes they're solved by knowing more. You might struggle with money because you don't understand budgeting. You might struggle with relationships because you don't understand communication. You might struggle with studying because you don't understand how memory works. You might struggle with your career because you don't understand which skills the market values. You might struggle with confidence because you don't understand how confidence is developed. Learning gives you more possible solutions, and the more solutions you know, the less trapped you feel. The person who learns has an advantage. Let's take a simple example. Two students want to get a job. Student A only studies what is required for college examinations. Student B studies the same academic material, but also spends 30 minutes every day learning practical skills. Maybe programming, maybe communication, maybe public speaking, maybe Excel, maybe artificial intelligence, maybe writing, maybe presentation skills, maybe problem solving. After 6 months, student B may have accumulated roughly 90 hours of additional learning. After 1 year, that's around 180 hours. After several years, the gap can become enormous. And here's the important part. Student B didn't necessarily need to be a genius. They simply had a system. Learn a little, every day, for a long time. This is where consistency becomes more powerful than intensity. The power of small daily learning. Let's say you decide to educate yourself for just 30 minutes every day. 30 minutes sounds insignificant, but let's calculate it. 30 minutes times 365 days equals 10,950 minutes. That's more than 182 hours per year. Now imagine what 182 focused hours could do. You could become conversational in a language. You could learn the basics of programming. You could understand personal finance. You could read several important books. You could improve your communication. You could learn video editing. You could study psychology. You could learn how to write better. You could develop an entirely new skill. And the interesting thing is that most people don't fail because they don't have 30 minutes. They fail because they don't protect those 30 minutes. They say, I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And suddenly, 5 years have passed. Your future self is built by your daily inputs. Think about your future self as a person you're constructing. Every day you put something into that person: a book, a conversation, a skill, an experience, a mistake, a lesson, a new idea, a useful habit, or sometimes nothing. The problem is that you don't notice the construction happening. If you study for one day, you don't suddenly become brilliant. If you read one book, your life doesn't transform overnight. If you learn programming for 1 hour, you don't become a software engineer. But that's not how growth works. Growth is usually invisible before it becomes obvious. A tree doesn't look dramatically different every morning, but give it years, and suddenly you have something enormous. Your knowledge works the same way. Atomic Habits. One of the most useful books connected to this idea is Atomic Habits by James Clear. The central idea of the book is that tiny habits, repeated consistently, can create remarkable results over time. The word atomic refers to something extremely small but powerful. The message is simple. Don't focus only on massive transformations. Focus on small improvements that you can repeat. This connects directly to educating yourself daily. You don't need to say, I will become incredibly knowledgeable this year. That's vague. Instead say, I will learn for 20 minutes every day. That's actionable. Maybe today you read 5 pages. Tomorrow you watch a lesson. The next day you take notes. Then you practice. The individual action looks small, but repetition creates accumulation. And accumulation creates transformation. Another powerful concept from the book is identity. Instead of saying, I want to read more, you can think, I am a person who learns every day. That's a different mindset. You're no longer trying to perform a temporary activity. You're building an identity. And when learning becomes part of your identity, educating yourself doesn't feel like punishment. It becomes normal. You don't ask, should I learn today? You simply learn, just like you brush your teeth without debating whether you should do it. Don't try to learn everything. There's another mistake people make. They hear educate yourself and think, I need to learn everything. No, you don't. You don't need to know everything. You need to know enough about the things that matter to your life. Think about learning in layers. First, learn how to learn. Then develop general knowledge. Then identify your interests. Then develop useful skills. Then go deeper into areas that matter to your future. For example, imagine you're interested in business. You don't need to become an expert in every business sector. Start with, what is profit? What is revenue? What is cash flow? What is marketing? What is customer behavior? What is competition? Then gradually move deeper. Education works like climbing a staircase. You don't jump from the ground to the 10th floor. You take steps. Education changes your conversations. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone suddenly mentions a topic you know absolutely nothing about? Maybe economics, maybe politics, maybe artificial intelligence?
Maybe history. Maybe psychology. You stay silent because you don't know what they're talking about. Now imagine the opposite. You have spent the last few years learning about different subjects. You don't need to be an expert, but you have enough knowledge to understand the basic concepts. You can ask intelligent questions.
You can contribute to conversations. You can understand references. You can connect ideas. Your communication improves, and gradually your confidence improves too. This is important. Knowledge doesn't automatically make you confident, but competence often creates confidence. When you know that you can understand difficult things, your relationship with uncertainty changes. You become less afraid of saying, "I don't know," because you also know, "I can learn." That's a powerful mindset. Education also makes you humble. At first, learning can make you feel smarter. Then the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Imagine a circle. Everything inside the circle represents what you know. Everything outside represents what you don't know. As your knowledge expands, your boundary with the unknown also expands. You become more aware of how much exists beyond your current understanding. This is why genuinely educated people often ask better questions. They don't pretend to know everything. They become comfortable saying, "I don't know," and then, "Let me find out." That attitude can change your life. The most dangerous phrase, "I already know this." One of the biggest enemies of learning is not ignorance, it's overconfidence. Someone hears an idea and says, "I already know that." Maybe they know the sentence, but do they understand it? And more importantly, do they apply it? You might know that exercise is good, but do you exercise? You might know that sleep matters, but do you sleep properly? You might know that reading is valuable, but do you read? You might know that saving money is important, but do you save? There is a massive difference between knowing something intellectually and integrating it into your behavior. Real education eventually changes behavior. Part 1 challenge. So here's your first challenge. Starting tomorrow, give yourself 30 minutes of intentional education every day. Not random scrolling, not endless entertainment, not motivational videos that you forget 5 minutes later. Choose one subject, set a timer, learn. Take a few notes, then ask yourself one question. How can I use what I learned? Because that final question turns information into practical knowledge. And if you do this consistently, something interesting will begin to happen. You won't notice the transformation immediately, but your thinking will gradually change. Your vocabulary will change. Your questions will change. Your conversations will change. Your decisions will change. And eventually, your life will begin to change. But there's a deeper question. What exactly should you learn? And how do you make sure that your daily education actually improves your life instead of becoming another form of procrastination? That's where we go next. How to educate yourself without wasting your time. Let's say you've accepted the idea. You want to learn every day. Great. But now you open the internet, and suddenly you have millions of choices. Learn coding, learn business, learn psychology, learn AI, learn history, learn investing, learn communication, learn fitness, learn philosophy, learn a language, learn photography, learn marketing, learn everything. And after an hour of searching, you haven't actually learned anything. You were simply deciding what to learn. This is one of the biggest problems in the information age. Too much information can become a distraction, so you need a system. Step 1. Build your personal curriculum. Schools give you a curriculum, but after formal education, you need to build your own. Ask yourself, what knowledge would make my life better? Not, what is trending? Not, what does everyone else study? But, what would make me more capable? For most people, there are several useful categories. 1. Communication. Learn how to speak clearly. Learn how to write. Learn how to listen. Learn how to explain ideas. Learn how to negotiate. These skills affect almost every part of life. 2. Financial literacy. Understand income, expenses, saving, debt, investing, risk, taxes, compounding. You don't need to become a financial expert, but you should understand how money works. 3. Technology. Technology increasingly influences education, work, business, entertainment, and communication. Understanding basic technology gives you an advantage. 4. Psychology. Learn how humans think. Understand habits. Motivation. Biases. Emotions. Decision-making. Communication. The better you understand people, the better you can navigate social environments. 5. Your professional skill. This is extremely important. Learn the skill that can make you valuable in your career. If you're a programmer, program. If you're a designer, design. If you're a writer, write. If you're a filmmaker, create. Education becomes powerful when it increases your ability to create value. Step 2. Learn from different formats. Don't believe that learning only means reading books. Books are powerful, but learning can happen through many formats. You can watch lectures, listen to podcasts, take online courses, read research papers, talk to experts, practice, build projects, observe, experiment, teach. In fact, one of the best ways to test whether you understand something is to try explaining it simply. Imagine you've learned compound interest. Instead of memorizing the definition, explain it to a 12-year-old. If you can explain it simply, you probably understand it. If you need complicated words to hide your confusion, you probably need to study more. The Feynman Style Test. Let's say you learn something about the human brain. You close your book, then ask yourself, can I explain this without looking? If you can, excellent. If you can't, go back, learn again, then explain it again. This process forces your brain to retrieve information rather than simply recognize it. Recognition feels like learning, but retrieval reveals whether you actually learned. For example, you might read 10 pages about memory and think, yes, I understand. Close the book. Now explain 3 major concepts from those pages. Suddenly you realize you remember very little. That's not failure, that's useful information. Now you know what to review. Step 3. Stop collecting knowledge. There is a trap called productive procrastination. You feel productive because you're learning, but you're actually avoiding action. Imagine someone watches 100 videos about starting a business. They understand marketing, they understand branding, they understand sales, they understand social media, but they never create a product. Another person watches 5 videos and starts. The second person may learn faster because reality gives them feedback. This is why education should eventually lead to action. Learn, apply, make mistakes, learn again, improve. That cycle is far more powerful than passive consumption. Knowledge plus action equals skill. Think about swimming. You can read 50 books about swimming. You can watch 100 tutorials. You can memorize every technique. But eventually, you have to enter the water. The same is true for almost every practical skill. You don't learn public speaking only by watching public speakers. You eventually have to speak. You don't learn programming only by watching coding tutorials. You eventually have to code. You don't learn writing only by reading books about writing. You eventually have to write. Education gives you the map. Practice makes you capable of walking the road. Step 4. Keep a knowledge journal. Here's a simple habit. Every day, write down 3 things. What did I learn? Why does it matter? How can I use it? That's it. For example, I learned that compound interest means earning returns on previous returns. Why does it matter? Because starting early can make a major difference in long-term wealth. How can I use it? I should understand long-term investing before making financial decisions. This takes a few minutes, but it forces you to process information. Over time, you create a personal database of ideas, and something fascinating happens. Old ideas begin connecting with new ideas. You learn about psychology. Later, you learn about marketing. Suddenly, you realize marketing uses psychology. You learn about communication. Then you learn about leadership. You realize leadership depends heavily on communication. You learn programming. Then you learn artificial intelligence. You discover how programming connects with AI. Knowledge begins forming a network, and this is when learning becomes extremely powerful. Step 5. Learn to ask better questions. Intelligent people aren't necessarily people who have every answer. They're often people who know how to ask better questions. Instead of, "Why am I bad at studying?" ask, "What exactly causes me to lose focus?" Instead of, "Why am I unsuccessful?" ask, "What skill am I missing?" Instead of, "Why don't people respect me?" ask, "How do I communicate and behave around others?" Instead of, "How do I become rich?" ask, "What skills create economic value?" Better questions lead to better investigations. Better investigations lead to better knowledge. Better knowledge leads to better decisions. The 7 habits of highly effective people that connect strongly with this topic is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. One of its important ideas is the habit of sharpen the saw. The concept is about renewing yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Imagine someone trying to cut down a tree with a blunt saw. They keep working harder. They sweat. They push. But the saw remains dull. Someone else stops for a while and sharpens the saw. Then they return and cut more effectively. The lesson is simple. You cannot spend your entire life producing without maintaining yourself. Educating yourself is one way of sharpening your mental saw. You are maintaining and improving your ability to think. You're updating your understanding. You're developing new skills. You're becoming more adaptable. This is especially important because life doesn't only require physical effort, it requires mental effort. Decision-making, problem-solving, learning, communication, creativity. And if you never sharpen your mental abilities, you can spend enormous amounts of energy solving problems inefficiently. Why daily education makes you more adaptable. Imagine 2 people working in the same industry. Person A learned everything they needed 10 years ago and stopped. Person B continues learning. New software appears. Person B learns it. New technology appears. Person B studies it. New communication methods emerge. Person B adapts. Eventually, the environment changes. Person A feels threatened. Person B sees an opportunity. Why? Because one person has developed the habit of adaptation. The modern world rewards people who can learn, not necessarily people who already know everything, because what you know today may become less useful tomorrow. But if you know how to learn, you can continue upgrading yourself. That is a much more durable advantage. Education can change your career. Suppose you're currently studying computer science. You learn the basics required by your university. That's good. But now imagine spending 30 minutes every day learning something outside your syllabus. Maybe artificial intelligence, maybe cloud computing, maybe cybersecurity, maybe software development, maybe data structures, maybe communication, maybe project management. After a year, you have accumulated hundreds of hours of additional learning. Now imagine turning some of that learning into projects. You don't simply have knowledge, you have evidence of ability. That's powerful, because employers don't only want people who know things, They want people who can do things. Education becomes valuable when it increases your ability to solve real problems. Education can improve your decisions. Your life is essentially a collection of decisions. What do you eat? Who do you spend time with? What do you study? What career do you choose? How do you spend your money? What habits do you develop? What opportunities do you accept? What risks do you take? The quality of your decisions depends partly on the quality of your mental models. If you understand probability, you may evaluate risk differently. If you understand psychology, you may recognize emotional manipulation. If you understand finance, you may evaluate debt differently. If you understand health and exercise fundamentals, you may make better lifestyle choices. Knowledge doesn't guarantee perfect decisions, but ignorance can make poor decisions much more likely. Education can protect you from manipulation. This is one of the most underrated benefits. The less you understand, the easier it is for someone else to control your interpretation of reality. Imagine someone tells you, "This investment is guaranteed." If you understand basic finance and risk, you become skeptical. Someone tells you, "Everyone is doing this." If you understand social psychology, you recognize social proof. Someone says, "This product will completely change your life." If you understand marketing, you recognize persuasion techniques. Education gives you mental defenses. You don't automatically believe everything. You ask, "What's the evidence? What are the incentives? What am I missing? Is there another explanation?" That's intellectual independence. But be careful. Education is not information overload. You don't need to spend 10 hours every day learning. In fact, trying to consume enormous amounts of information can become counterproductive. Your brain needs time to process. Sometimes the best thing you can do after learning something is to stop consuming and think. Ask, "What does this mean? How does this connect to what I already know? Where could I apply this?" That's why 30 focused minutes can be more valuable than 3 hours of distracted consumption. Your daily learning system. Here's a simple system you can actually follow. 10 minutes, learn. Read, watch, listen, study. 10 minutes, process. Write notes, explain the concept, ask questions, connect it to previous knowledge. 10 minutes, apply. Solve something, practice, create something, explain it to someone. That's 30 minutes. And if you have more time, expand it. But don't underestimate 30 minutes. Consistency matters. What happens after 30 days? You probably won't become a genius, and that's okay. But you may notice something. You're starting to think differently. You remember more. You ask better questions. You have more topics to discuss. You feel slightly more capable. You have a growing collection of knowledge. Now continue for 6 months. The difference becomes more noticeable. Continue for 1 year. You may have developed an entirely new skill. Continue for 5 years. Now you're looking at thousands of hours of accumulated knowledge and practice. And that is where the real magic appears. Time amplifies consistent behavior. For the next 7 days, don't try to transform your entire life. Choose one subject. Study it for 30 minutes every day. Write 3 things you learned and use at least 1 thing in real life. After 7 days, ask, "Did I become slightly better than I was 7 days ago?" If yes, continue. Because the goal isn't to become perfect. The goal is to become slightly better than yesterday. But there's one final piece, because even if you understand the importance of education, even if you have books, even if you have the internet, even if you have a perfect learning system, there will still be days when you don't feel like learning. There will be distractions. There will be exams. There will be work. There will be stress. There will be social media. There will be days when you feel tired. So how do you make education a permanent part of your life? That's what part 3 is about. Turn learning into a lifelong identity. The biggest goal isn't to read 100 books. It isn't to complete 50 courses. It isn't to collect certificates. The biggest goal is this: become the kind of person who never stops learning. Because once learning becomes part of your identity, you don't need constant motivation. You simply continue. Think about someone who loves fitness. They don't go to the gym only because they want to lose weight. They see themselves as someone who trains. So even when motivation disappears, identity keeps them moving. You can do the same with education. Instead of saying, "I need to study," say, "I am someone who learns." That's a small change in language, but it can change how you behave. The world will reward your curiosity. Think about a child. Children constantly ask, "Why? How? What is that? What happens if? Why does the moon look like that? How does this work? What happens inside a computer?" Children naturally explore. Then, somewhere along the way, adults start becoming afraid of not knowing. They stop asking questions because they don't want to look stupid. But curiosity is not stupidity. Curiosity is the beginning of intelligence. The smartest question you can ask is sometimes, "Why?" And then, "How do we know?" And then, "What if we're wrong?" Those questions protect you from blindly accepting ideas. And remember, you don't need to become a completely different person overnight. Just learn something today that your future self will thank you for. If you believe that knowledge can change the way you think, the way you speak, and ultimately the way you live, then you're in the right place. This is Audible Ecstacy, where every video is designed to give you something worth thinking about. So if you don't want to stop learning, subscribe to Audible Ecstacy, because we're not here just to consume content. We're here to become better. One idea, one lesson, one day at a time. This is Audible Ecstacy. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next video.